much, Brother David, and good morning, everybody. Aren't those just magic words that we've just sung? It's all about if we live now for Christ, then we're going to be partakers of the divine glory. That's our hope. That's the aspirations that each one of us are searching for. That's what we want. Our opening thoughts were directed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. We shall all be changed. But as much as we want that change begins now. And that's really what we read about in Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, look, this is my favourite chapter in the Bible. And I also need to confess right from the outset, we're going to be talking about various changes that need to take place. And I just want to put it on the record, my life isn't perfect. There are so many changes that I still need to make in my life. And when I give exhortations, one of the things I want to emphasise to people is that I pick topics because they're topics that I know I need to hear. So please, when you're hearing these words, don't just think, oh, look, this is somebody who thinks he's got it all right. I don't have it. You know, all of these things that we read about here in Romans chapter 12, these are aspirational, but these are things that when we committed to Christ and said, you know what? I'm actually going to change. I'm going to make changes in my life. It's not about me. It's all about Jesus Christ. Paul could say that it's not about him. It was all about Jesus Christ crucified. And we're going to come back and we're going to look at that. So I'm sure as you read through Romans 12 that you'd appreciate that this actually encapsulates what it actually means to be a disciple of Christ. And in a sense, we're only going to look at just a couple of verses from Romans chapter 12, but hopefully as it was read to us by Brother Stephen, that you sort of took the message and the challenge that came out. But ultimately, it's wrapped together very nicely, I think, by Paul when he says in verse 21, this is the pinnacle of discipleship. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. And in a sense, I could probably say no more. Isn't that's really the epitome of what discipleship is all about? That the challenges, the changes that we have to make, it's all about, with God's help, of course, it's all about not being conquered by evil, but rather that we are striving to conquer evil by doing good. So this morning I want to focus on change, and in a sense, as has been indicated, I spent some time with the arranging group yesterday, and we dealt with a number of issues with respect to change. But I should also just say too, and I'm going to just say it, that this is a recycled exhortation. But you know what? I think sometimes in life, there's nothing wrong with a bit of recycling to take place. And maybe just for those, and there are some who have heard this message, maybe it's a case that we can sort of pause and reflect, and I'll try and make it a little bit different for those who may have heard this previously. But I want to begin by, in a sense, setting the stage. What do we actually mean by change? And to sort of perhaps have a construct around this notion, what actually is change? And indeed, as has already been inferred, we're in spring. Well, here's the good thing. This is the time to make changes. You know, in a secular sense, people start to get out in the garden. People start to sort of say and speak about spring and renewal. And here's the really, really good thing for all of us. Google said to me that September the 4th is the very best day to make changes. Yeah, it actually said that September the 4th was the very best day to make changes. So if you ever wanted to make changes, September the 4th was the day. Well, maybe it said it was today, but that is September the 4th. But I say that seriously. We all talk about change, but how often do we put it off? And maybe you've been in many, many meetings. In fact, scary thought. I'm mid-50s these days. I'd like to think that I was still in my 20s, but alas, that is not the case. Certainly having a 28-year-old son, it's not going to be the case. And so when you sort of do the maths, in my case, I've actually been in around 2,000 meetings or thereabouts. And here's the scary thought that I start to think about, and some of you will be of sort of an older generation, and perhaps you'll do the maths as to how many meetings you've been in. How much change has actually taken place in your life? And for many of you, I'm sure you're probably sitting in the same seats last week. And some of you may very well have been sitting for half a lifetime almost in the same seats. What real change has actually taken place? And again, when I ask you that question, please, all the questions I'm asking to you, I've asked of myself, and I'm asking of myself simultaneously. So how much real change has taken place? Here's the reality. All of us like a comfort zone. We all like a comfort zone. In driving here to Halifax Street, I've got a choice of, I would suggest, at least 3 genuine ways that Google Maps will indicate that there is no difference between how long it will take to get here. And guess what I do? I go the same way that I head to Adelaide University. And I go the same way every single day. And yet I've got a choice. Why do I do this? And you think about yourself. Why do you do what you do? Because all of us love a comfort zone. We all like to do something that you can go on autopilot and you don't really need to think. And therein perhaps is the challenge, that we can sometimes put our lives on autopilot, but what about discipleship? Are we putting discipleship on autopilot and sort of just hitting the cruise control and perhaps not sort of engaging as we should? And again, that's a question for all of us to think about. None of us like change. Yeah, we like things to always be the same. Gmail did an update a few weeks ago, and all of a sudden my inbox looked different. You know, it was sort of similar, but it was different. There was some different colours. And you know what? I like the old better. You know, Facebook has had a number of iterations, and of course, guess what they say to you straight away? Oh, you can still stick with the old, then at some particular point you've got to change. And don't get my wife started on when you go shopping, and guess what? Woolies or Coles occasionally make some changes, and you're used to on that aisle there picking up the jam or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you're getting something else. We just don't like those things. We like everything about our lives to be nice, neat, compact, pop it in a box, and that's how it is. Well, that's not what discipleship is all about. And so here's the question, the key question I think all of us, as we gather here this morning, need to ask ourselves: how much has changed since you were baptised? How real have those changes been? You know, what we actually said was that when we got baptised, whenever that happened to be, that in singleness of mind, I want to serve Christ. That's what we said. You know, Paul in 2 Corinthians 5 says that we said we wanted to become a new creation. Romans 6, that we read on a regular basis. We said that we no longer wish to be enslaved to sin. But I ask the question of you and of myself as well: are we really wanting to change? Deep down, do we want to change? Or do we enjoy this present life? This is really, I think, what it all boils down to. Are we comfortable with what we've got? Let me just give you a quote with respect to change. This is just a secular quote, but I think it's got relevance both in a secular and also in a spiritual context. Change is hard because people overestimate the value of what they have and underestimate the value of what they may gain by giving that up. In other words, we're content with what we've got, and we sort of think, well, if I change, is that going to be of the same value? And so there's a degree of acceptance of what it happens to be. We don't get in there and make those changes. I want to begin our journey, if we can, to come across to Hebrews chapter 11, and in particular verse 25. Wonderful chapter, Hebrews 11, and the writer to the Hebrews actually distills and brings out all of the elements of faith. And I think sometimes what we do is we focus on faith, and faith is absolutely imperative. But I really want to just extract from perhaps verse 24, because I think this provides a bit of a context for our discussions. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. I read those words, and I'm sure all of us have read it on many occasions. It's easy to read those particular words, but let's just sort of try and put ourselves into the shoes of Moses just for a moment. Here you are growing up in absolute opulence. You can do whatever you want, yeah? Anything that you want. There's unlimited resources at your disposal. Eat, drink and be merry, and whatever else you want to do. We don't have to extend it too far. We all know what the flesh is like. This is how Egypt is described. This is the situation. But what was the choice? What was the choice that Moses made? Well, here's somebody who did appreciate that it's not so much about the temporal, but it's all about the everlasting. But here's part of the change. He chose rather to be mistreated than to enjoy, and this is the next key phrase, the fleeting pleasures of sin. Look, we kid ourselves. Sin is enjoyable. Yep, I enjoy sin, and I reckon if I was to ask everybody here, all of us enjoy sin. This is one of the challenges, and this is why it makes it so hard to change, because sin is enjoyable. But in a sense, what we need to try and do is to embrace exactly what the writer to the Hebrews is saying here. Moses was faced with the same challenges, the same choice that we're all faced with. And indeed, arguably, one might say, well, he had it in greater abundance than what we could ever have. On tap, life of ease, luxury, whatever you wanted. What he actually did was he said, hey, you know what? I'm going to give up those short-term pleasures, and rather, I want to be mistreated. Who wants to be mistreated? I don't want to be mistreated. But in a sense, that's discipleship. In a sense, that's being, I'm crucified with Christ. I'm mistreated. Why? Because I'm looking forward to the vision. I'm looking forward to the reward, as the end of verse 26, and I'm reading from the ESV. There was enormous treasures in the here and the now in Egypt, but Moses considered the reproach. He considered being downtrodden. That was of greater wealth for him than to just enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And that's really, I think, the challenge. I know we're very close to Hebrews 11, and you might just care to glance down at verse 12, because I think that also fills in some of the challenge that we're facing as well. Sin easily entangles us. And yet the writer to the Hebrews says here, what we have to do is we've got to lay aside every weight. Maybe it's just me, but I'm sure there's many of you would be thinking, if only he had have said lay aside some weights. Yeah, that would be a little bit more in our comfort zone. If we could just lay aside a few weights. How does he say? It's right out there, the superlative. Every single weight. So here's the challenge, and I haven't got rid of all the weights in my life, let me tell you. There are weights that I need to get rid of, and I'm sure there are weights that you need to. But here's the thing. This today could be that defining day where you say, you know what, I've got to wait in my life, and with God's help and with prayer, I want to actually push that to one side. I actually want to be a little more like Jesus. That's the challenge, and this is why it's really important. And you know, it's a great time of the year to be making resolutions as to what we actually want to do, changes that we want to take on board, and that we want to say, I want to be a little more like Christ. That's what the change is all about. It's all about us saying, how much like Christ do I want to be? Think about the question that was asked of Jesus. I think it was Thomas. And he said, I want to see the Father. If we see the Father, that's going to be sufficient for me. And Jesus said, he that has seen the Father has seen me. And in a sense, the changes that we're embracing, others should start to see a little more like Jesus. That maybe we are the manifestation of Jesus for certain people, our work colleagues, etc. Perhaps other family members that haven't embraced our hope. That's the challenge, and that's really where it's all about. It's all about us changing to be a little bit more like Jesus. So let's come back and let's explore, what does that actually mean when we speak about, and we're coming back to Romans chapter 12. What does it actually mean about becoming a little bit more like Jesus? And the situation here in Romans 12, and it's quite interesting, this isn't an appeal that Paul puts forward to his readers. He's already got to the 12th chapter, but he says, and I'm quoting from the New Living Translation, he says, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Think about that. And Brother David sort of, in his prayer, mentioned about the blessings that our Father provides for us. Think about what we've got. In fact, everything is God's. At best, we are stewards, cattle on 1,000 hills. What can we actually give God? He has given everything to us. And indeed, what he has provided, of course, is a wonderful hope as well. Wonderful hope that has been provided. That's the hope that's described by the writer to the Hebrews as an anchor to our soul. So we're told to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Now that's an oxymoron if ever I heard it. How can you have a living sacrifice? For those who like English oxymorons, deafening silence. It's just that they're polarisations. But what's actually meant when we speak about a living sacrifice? Well, it's exactly what Paul said in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15. He said, I die daily. To the Galatians, he said that he was crucified. But what does it actually mean by sacrifice? And for us, what does it mean in 2022 when we speak about a living sacrifice? Well, I think Brother Bob Lloyd captures it so well when he says, a sacrifice is when you don't do something that you'd like to do. So you'd like to do something, but you don't do that. And if you think about what we already looked at in Hebrews 11, sin is alluring, isn't it? We're enticed by it. It's pleasurable. But in a sense, when we start to look at sacrifice is all about saying, I'm not going to do something that I want to do. It's not about me. It's all about either others or God or Christ. That's what's required. Something to think about as well, and that is that the Bible is all about transformation. It's not just about information. Sure, we need to immerse ourselves in the actual Bible itself, but it doesn't matter whether you can quote verses verbatim. How many of those verses have actually impacted and penetrated and changed your heart? That's the key question. Has the Bible actually transformed you? And that's really what the thrust of verse 2 is all about. It's not about conformity to the world. We know what conformity to the world actually means. Conformity means that it's sort of that cookie cutter. Everything's the same. Are your lives lives that conform? So if people lined you up and they wouldn't be able to tell the difference, and if you spoke to people in conversations that they couldn't tell whether you're a disciple or not, that's conformity to the world. And each one of us will come to the conclusion as to what we need to do. But if they look the same and we look the same and we speak the same and do the same as everybody else, that's conformity to the world. What's required, though, is that we need to be transformed. Now, what's the transformation process? And I'm sure you've heard that the little Greek word behind that. It's where we get our English word metamorphosis. And the whole idea of a metamorphosis is sort of that ugly grub. So we've got ugly grub, and what we then do is we turn ugly grub into wonderful butterfly. And the process, the chrysalis phase that is taken through, you've got to go through that. Is it enjoyable necessarily? And I guess you might say, well, look, the butterfly doesn't get a choice. And you know what? We don't get a choice either. If we don't transform and translate how we are, that wonderful opening stanza that we spoke about, that in the twinkling of an eye we shall all be changed. This corruptible wants to put on incorruption. But here's the thing, the change all needs to take place now. Change is painful. So too was a cross. And Jesus, as the writer to the Hebrews in Hebrews 12 said, he endured the cross. Right? It was for the joy that was set before him. So I guess we perhaps need to then explore, why is change difficult? Why is it so difficult to change? And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just sort of set before you a number of reasons. And these have got applicability whether we're talking secular or whether we're talking spiritual. They're drawn from psychology. I don't know whether we've got any young people who are studying psychology or not, just in case there are. I don't teach in psychology, I teach in business. But there's a number of things when we start to look at the psychology literature. And psychology, by the way, it's all about the mind. It's how people think, why they react as they do. It's about behaviour. So why is change so difficult? If you want to implement change, why is it just so difficult? Well, the first thing that psychologists and people who research in this area say, we tend to look at change as being one big thing. So we look at what we've got to do and it's the enormity of the situation. And you sort of say, oh, just never ever get there. Yeah, it's just a mountainous, huge, huge problem that we've got. And so what do we actually do? We actually look at it and we sort of say, too hard, I'm defeated. And we tend to also view things as being an all or nothing situation. In other words, we've got to sort of, oh, look, I'll have to conquer all of this or there won't be any success. That's how we tend to view it. So our minds are programmed in that way. How do we overcome that? Well, here's what we need to do, and that is what we need to do is to implement micro changes. And there's a great book called Atomic Habits. Some of you may have heard of that book, fantastic book. And what the author of that book actually says, you break things down into small, bite-sized little chunks. And so you see this as a process. Hey, it might be something big, but over time you are gradually making progress. Does that sort of sit with what we're called upon to do? Week by week we reflect, we recalibrate, we remeasure, and so over the course of time there should be some small incremental changes. Is that the God that we worship? That's really what he's looking for. Are there some small changes that we are making in our lives? That's what's required. So again, it's about sort of looking at the problem, but in a sense quantifying that particular problem. The second challenge that we face is that change requires effort and habit. That's the problem. And look, let me just share something with you. I need to drop a couple of kilos. And I've got a good friend who you'll know as well, Graham Parcell. And one of the things that Graham has actually said to me at different times, he said, I made a decision about 30 years ago not to get, in Graham's words, and I quote, middle-aged spread. That was how Graham sort of said. Now, Graham swims a lot, he runs a lot, he does everything, and he eats a good diet. Now, I've got a problem. I enjoy Coca-Cola. And I'm not a diabetic. I've consumed far more Coke than I would care to honestly admit to individuals here. I just love Coca-Cola. And at different points, even when we lived at Singapore, I would drink in excess of a litre of Coke a day. And I know there's the shutters and and you'd sort of think, hey, it's easy to give up. Yeah, it's easy to give up. It's easy to give up. I know everything. Do I know it? Yeah, but knowledge does not equal practice. I know it's bad. Think about a smoker. I'm not a smoker. Smokers know how bad it is, but do they give it up? So it takes some willpower and some habit on our behalf. In other words, it's not just about knowing that there are some issues. It's about us sort of drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm going to take action. That's what we have to decide. I'm going to take action. Now, answer to the Coca-Cola question that's probably on your minds is, for I would suggest around about 4 months. My wife's here, and I think I'm going to say 4 months to 5 months, I drank no Coke. Absolutely none. A little bit has come back in of late. Now, do I regard that as bad? No. What I'm regarding that as, that this is probably for me going to be a little bit of a battle. Do I look at it and say that I've had success to some extent? Absolutely. And this is, I think, how we need to value things as well when it comes to change. Will we have some successes? Will we have some wins? And we should be getting some wins against sin. We should be. Are we always going to be successful? The answer is no. But guess what we do? We reset, we recalibrate, we remeasure. And in my case, I need to reduce the Coke. I'm not going to make excuses, but it comes in at different times. And here's just another thing. Sometimes we know what's the precursor to our failings. And if you know what the precursor is, you've got to eliminate that precursor. Enough said on that. Do we want it bad enough? That's the third reason. Do we actually want it bad enough? Think about Moses, which we read. Yeah, the reproach of Christ. Seriously, you've got the riches of Egypt, reproach of Christ. If I'm living in the here and the now, seriously, is that a tough question? It's probably not. But if I've got a mind that says, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard of the glories that are going to be presented in the kingdom, that's the vision that I need to have before me. And so the reality is, what we have to do, we have to make it a priority. Is the kingdom of God, is it worth everything to you? Does it mean everything? Think back to Jesus' words in Matthew 13, and he spoke about a parable. And it said about a merchant man, and he said this particular merchant man, he collected fine pearls, and he had obviously quite a lot of pearls. And pearls are worth money, and then he came across one that was absolutely magnificent. And what did he actually do with the other pearls that he got? And some of those other pearls must have had value attached with them, but the pearl of great price, and that's what you and I have received. The pearl of great price was worth everything else. That's the challenge we need to make. The fourth issue is we don't always see immediate results. Now, believe it or not, I managed to lose, I think, around about 12 kilos. Winter hasn't been kind, and unfortunately, I think a loss of 12 has also meant, over the winter months, a gain of 13. But I did have some losses. And I always look at the positives where I had some losses. No, I don't think the gains were as bad. But the point I want to make, though, is that sometimes we don't see immediate changes, and this disillusions us. And sometimes we feel overwhelmed, and I won't get through it. And some of the changes as disciples that we're called upon to make, the fruit of the Spirit, and indeed in what we've read in Romans chapter 12, these are not necessarily things that we're going to immediately discern to say, I can tick off, I'm now more kind. That these are not characteristics that sort of have got big lights in front of them that say, and you've got a banner that says kindness, and I'm now kind. So these are things where it is hard for us to see. There's not that immediacy of results. And everybody wants things to be done immediately. That's why we Google the answers. That's why, instant coffee, everything's instant. The only thing in our lives that should be instant is prayer. But we live in a day and age in which people want immediacy, and that's the challenge that we face. We often say that we are logical people, and I'd like to say, and I'm sure most people would like to say, you're really logical. I don't let emotions get in the way of my decisions. I sort of make all of my decisions. Hey, it's up here that does all the thinking, and this never ever rules. Well, as much as I'd love to say that, hey, it's all about I think and I work through it and I'm emotionally detached, guess what psychologists say? We kid ourselves. Psychologists say all of our decisions come largely from our emotions. And then here's what we do is we then rationalise our decisions that we've made. But it starts in the heart and then, the mind might come into play. Bit of an echo of Jesus' words there, isn't it? When he said it's out of it's the heart, the abundance of the heart. The mouth speaketh. Yes, there's a lot of things that Jesus said with regards to the heart. So it is all about the emotions. Again, as I've said, knowledge does not equate to practice. We might know certain things, but do we actually do them? Do we actually make that decision that we should? Think about the emotions, the strong emotions that we have, that all of us have got. Enjoyment, happiness, anger, fear, sadness. These are the four strongest emotions. And you think about how they impact upon our lives. So this is the challenge. This is the battle that we're facing when we want to change our lives for Christ, that we have to overcome some very, very strong emotions. And those emotions generally are going to sort of win on most occasions. And the final point I want to raise is our environment, the environment in which we live. It is challenging to be a disciple of Christ. But I want to submit to you, and this is why we also went back to Hebrews, it doesn't matter which day and age that you've wanted to be a worshipper of Christ. The challenge has always been there. That the same issues that Moses had to deal with, they're the issues that we've got to deal with. It's the same principles, it's the same flesh. And indeed, as we sung in the hymn prior to me beginning, we want lives that are free from sin. That's what our aspiration is. That's really the challenge that we are facing with. We live in an environment that is not conducive to worshipping Christ. We can rationalise it and say we've got democracy and we've got freedom of worship. Hey, all of those things are really nice. But the reality is there are strong pulls, there are strong connections for us to conform to the world, which is what Paul said here in Romans 12 that we can't do. And I'm not going to define that because you know what? Each and every one of us in our own minds, we will set up what we think are the parameters. What does conformity to this world mean? And as we grow closer to Christ, I think our definition of conformity to the world will also change as well. So that's the challenge that we're faced with. How then can we as disciples of Christ, what can we do? What are some of the things that we can actually do to try and become a little more like Christ, to change our lives? I want to give you 4 strategies that are going to help us. And indeed, these 4 strategies are identical to what psychologists would say if you want to make some changes in your life. So it's the same 4 steps, but what we're going to do is we're going to make them applicable for disciples here this morning. So here's the first one. The first one is a recognition of need. We have to recognise the need for change. Why do you want to change? Why do we need to change? I guess we could draw upon what Paul has said here, not to be conformed to this world. Perhaps the greater reason, the recognition is, or all of us who have been baptised into Christ, we actually gave a commitment. We actually said, hand on heart, here's what I want to do. I want to give away this present mortal life because I want to serve Christ, I want to serve God. I want to worship. This is why we're here. And indeed, by the way, worship isn't just limited to Sunday mornings. And worship is derived from the English word of worth. We place worth on something. That's what worship and how it's constructed. But our first point is the recognition of need. Once we recognise the need, perhaps that's the starting point. Can we all recognise the need? That's why we've come here. I would suggest we've all recognised a need. We need to be here. The second thing that psychologists say is we've got to develop a vision. What's your vision? What's your vision? You know, where do you see yourself? Think about what Revelation says. Revelation 21. Yeah, all things are going to be made new. No more sorrow, no more sighing, no more death. Those former things are passed away. And if you like social reform agendas and you want social justice, you cannot beat Psalm 72 for what it actually unpacks and says. This is what Jesus is going to do for the poor and the needy. This is what Jesus' social reform package looks like. There's true justice that comes. The prophet Isaiah said, hey, you think about what the kingdom's going to be like. Well, no, your eyes, your ears just cannot comprehend what it's like. We need to have a vision. And the wise man Solomon said that where there is no vision, a people perish. So a vision is really important. So what's your vision of the kingdom? And for some it'll be that they want to be reunited with those that have fallen asleep in Christ. That's part of my reason. My father is asleep in Christ and I want to see him again. I want to be united with him. I want to share and be in glory with him and with the Father and with Christ and with others. That's a vision, and you need to personalise it. That's the most important thing. We need to personalise the vision. The next, and this is the challenge, this is where it starts to sort out those who are serious, the pretenders from the contenders. It's all about, are you prepared to take action? Think about what Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 1. He says, make every effort to supplement to your faith virtue, and he goes on and he lists a whole lot of things. So in other words, we've got to take action. Don't have to solve all of the problem today. You know, all of our sins don't have to be. The good thing, though, is that if we confess our faults, they're forgiven. But if we do have challenges in our life, it's just incremental steps. Are we actually taking action? And then the final thing happens to be, it's all about embedding that change so that it becomes part of your culture. Think about these words of Paul in Colossians 1 and at verse 27. It's about the hope of glory, Christ in us. Just think about those words, and that's why we're here this morning. That's the hope. It's the hope of being glorified in Christ Jesus. And it's John who reminds us that everybody who has this hope in him, and all of us have got this hope, guess what we actually do? We purify ourselves. And that's why we meet here this morning. We remember one who changed the course of world history. We remember one who said, I'm prepared to change. I call upon you to change. I'm the leader. You just need to be my followers. Thank you.